Welcome to Revenge Harvest. Today's story starts with a locked door and a lie worth 6 figures. My name is Brooke Callahan, and I am 33 years old. By the time my mother stood up at Christmas Eve dinner and clinked her wine glass like she was giving a toast, I already knew this wasn't about celebrating the holiday. It was an ambush, wrapped in garland and expensive Merlot. My father sat at the head of the table looking like a man who had rehearsed his part and was waiting for his cue. My brother sat across from me in a brand new cashmere sweater I guarantee he didn't pay for, grinning with that golden boy confidence he'd carried since childhood, the kind you develop when nobody in your family has ever told you no. There were 40 people in my parents' house in Lake Forest, Illinois. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors from the cul-de-sac, my parents' golf friends, my father's business partner, even our old pediatrician. My mother had invited an audience. She raised her glass and said, "Before we eat, I want to share something beautiful. Brooke has agreed to fund Derek's restaurant so he can finally follow his dream. Isn't that wonderful?" I hadn't agreed to anything. 40 people turned to look at me. Some were smiling. A few were already clapping. My brother raised his glass toward me and winked, like we were in on this together. My father nodded once, slowly, the way he does when he considers a matter settled. My mother continued. "She's putting up the $95,000 to secure the lease, the renovation, and the first 6 months of operating costs. Derek has worked so hard for this, and Brooke has always been the responsible one." Responsible. That was the word they always used. Not generous, not kind, responsible. Like handing over my savings was a chore I'd been assigned. The same way I'd been assigned doing Derek's homework in high school, co-signing his first apartment lease, and quietly paying off the $14,000 in credit card debt he racked up at 26 because my mother said it would destroy his confidence if he had to face it himself. I set my fork down and looked at my mother. I never agreed to that. The room didn't go silent the way it does in movies. It went confused. People glanced at each other. Someone near the end of the table laughed nervously. My brother's grin didn't drop yet. He thought I was being modest. My mother's smile tightened. "Brooke, we discussed this." "No," I said. "You discussed it." "I said I needed to think about it. You apparently heard yes." My father leaned forward. "This isn't the time." "You made it the time," I said. "You announced it in front of 40 people without my consent. That was your choice." My brother finally stopped smiling. He looked at our mother like a child, checking whether the adult was going to fix this. She always had before. Then my father did something I will never forget. He reached under the table and pulled out a folder. Inside was a partnership agreement, already drafted, already notarized, with my name printed on the signature line. He slid it across the table toward me. "Just sign it," he said. "We'll talk details later." I stared at the document. My name was typed in places I had never seen, next to obligations I had never discussed. Someone had prepared this without me. Someone had taken my identity and built a financial commitment around it, like I was a prop in their business plan. My mother leaned in and whispered just loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Don't embarrass us, Brooke. Not tonight." I looked at the agreement one more time. Then I looked at my brother, who was already reaching for the pen like the only thing missing was my hand. I pushed the folder back across the table and stood up. "I'm not signing this. Not tonight. Not ever. And if anyone here thinks announcing a $95,000 commitment on my behalf without asking me is a family tradition worth keeping, you should know I've already spoken to my bank and my attorney." That was partly true. I had spoken to my bank about unrelated account security 2 weeks earlier. I hadn't called a lawyer yet, but I knew my family. They didn't respond to emotion, they responded to consequences. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw locked. My brother slammed his palm on the table and said, "Are you serious right now? You're going to humiliate me in front of everyone over money you're not even using?" That sentence. Money you're not even using. Like my savings account was a parking spot he was entitled to, because I wasn't currently standing in it. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. "Before I tell you what happened next, and what they discovered a week later that changed everything, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments." I want to see how far this story travels. I walked toward the front door, and my father followed me into the hallway. He grabbed my elbow. Not hard, but firm enough to make a point. You walk out that door, and you're done with this family. I pulled my arm free and said, then I'm done. He stepped back like I'd hit him. In 33 years, I had never said that. I had always folded, always softened, always found a way to frame their demands as love and my compliance as maturity. But standing in that hallway with the sound of 40 confused relatives murmuring behind me, something broke that couldn't be unbroken. I stepped outside into the December cold and realized I had driven here with my brother because my car was in the shop. I had no ride, my phone was at 11%, and my family was on the other side of that door rewriting the story in real time. I called a rideshare, 7 minutes. I stood on the porch in 28-degree weather and waited, because going back inside would have cost me something I couldn't get back. Before the car arrived, my mother opened the front door. She didn't come outside. She stood in the warm light of the foyer and said, "When you're ready to act like an adult, you know where we are." I didn't turn around. The Uber driver asked if I was okay. I said yes and then didn't speak for 25 minutes. He played soft jazz and didn't push. I've never been more grateful for a stranger's silence. I checked into a Holiday Inn off the interstate with a dead phone, no charger, and a chest full of something between fury and grief. I asked the front desk if they had a phone charger I could borrow. They handed me a universal one without a word. Small kindness from strangers hits different when your own family just tried to auction your future over Christmas ham. By the time my phone powered back on, there were 23 missed calls. My mother, my father, my brother, my aunt, 2 cousins. Even my parents' neighbor, Diane, who I am almost certain was recruited to guilt me into calling back. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I did what I do for a living. I work as a fraud investigator for a regional insurance company. I assess claims, identify patterns of deception, and build cases from documentation. I have been trained to recognize when someone's story doesn't add up. And my family's story had never added up. I had just spent 33 years pretending the math worked because the alternative was too painful. That night, I opened my laptop and started building a file. I pulled up bank statements, old text messages, email threads, everything I had archived over the years out of habit. Compliance instinct, I used to joke. Turns out it wasn't a joke. It was survival. The pattern was immediate and brutal once you laid it out on a timeline. When I was 24, my parents pressured me into co-signing a $30,000 auto loan for Derek because his credit was too low. He defaulted after 9 months. I paid it off over 2 years to protect my own score. When I was 27, my mother called crying, saying Derek owed $14,000 across 3 credit cards, and if it went to collections, it would ruin his chance at a business loan. I paid it. She said the family would reimburse me. Nobody ever mentioned it again. When I was 29, Derek asked to borrow $8,000 for what he called a sure-thing investment with a friend. I said no. My father called me selfish. My mother said I was jealous of Derek's ambition. They didn't speak to me for 2 months. I eventually sent $5,000 just to end the silence. The investment was a weekend gambling trip to Vegas. I found out from a cousin's Instagram story. When I was 31, someone attempted to open a line of credit using my social security number. The credit bureau flagged it. I filed a report but never got confirmation of who did it. I had my suspicions. I buried them because the alternative would have meant admitting something I wasn't ready to face. And now, at 33, they wanted $95,000. Not as a loan, not as an investment, as an obligation, because Brooke is responsible. I saved the file, encrypted it, and went to sleep at 2 a.m. on a Holiday Inn pillow that smelled like industrial lavender. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up to 14 new voicemails. My mother's first message was calm and controlled. "Brooke, you ruined Christmas Eve. I hope you're happy. Derek is devastated. Your father hasn't slept. Call us when you're ready to fix this." Her second message, 3 hours later, was less composed. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is not the daughter I raised. You've always been the strong one. This is not strength. This is cruelty. My brother didn't call. He texted once. Nice performance. Hope it was worth it. Then, 4 hours later, Mom's crying. You know that, right? My father sent a single text. You have until New Year's to make this right. Make this right. Like I was the one who had fabricated a financial commitment, announced it publicly, and slid a notarized contract across the dinner table like a mob deal in a Hallmark movie. I spent Christmas alone in that hotel room, eating vending machine peanut butter crackers and watching a nature documentary about whales. It was the most peaceful holiday I'd had in years. By December 27th, I had made 4 moves. First, I called my bank and placed a verbal password on all accounts, changed security questions to answers my family couldn't guess, and requested a full audit of any third-party access attempts over the past 3 years. Second, I ran a credit check on myself. Clean, except for one inquiry from 18 months ago I hadn't authorized. Originating from a financial services company in downtown Chicago, Derek's neighborhood. Third, I emailed my supervisor at work with a heads up that I might receive retaliatory contact from family members making false claims about my finances or mental state. My boss, Janet, replied within the hour. Noted. Documented. If anything comes through, it goes straight to legal. Focus on you. Fourth, I called an actual attorney. Not a bluff this time. A real one. I told her everything. She listened for 40 minutes without interrupting, then said 3 sentences that rearranged my understanding of the past decade. What you're describing is a pattern of financial coercion and possible identity fraud. The unauthorized credit inquiry alone is actionable. But the bigger issue is that your family appears to have made financial representations in your name to third parties, and that creates liability for you if you don't formally disassociate from those claims. That last part stopped me cold. Liability for me. My family hadn't just been taking my money. They had been using my name as currency in rooms I wasn't in, making promises on my behalf to people I had never met. And if any of those promises collapsed, the trail led back to me. That was when everything shifted from a family argument to something much darker. On December 29th, I got a message from a woman named Sandra Cho. She was the landlord of the commercial property Derek wanted for his restaurant. Hi, Brooke. I'm reaching out because your name is listed as the guarantor on the lease agreement Derek submitted last month. I wanted to confirm some details before we finalize. I read that message 3 times. My name, listed as guarantor. On a lease I had never seen, for a space I had never visited, in a deal I had never agreed to. I called Sandra immediately. She was professional and cautious. She said Derek had submitted the application in November, weeks before Christmas Eve. The lease was for a 3,200 square foot space on Clark Street at $7,800 per month. The agreement listed me as both the financial guarantor and a silent equity partner contributing $95,000 in startup capital. She said she had tried to reach me directly, but the contact number on the application went to a voicemail that didn't sound like a woman's voice. She had assumed it was an assistant. It was Derek's phone number, listed as mine. I told Sandra clearly and calmly that I had never authorized the use of my name, had never agreed to serve as guarantor, had never seen the lease, and that any documentation bearing my signature or consent was fraudulent. There was a long pause on her end. Then she said, I appreciate you telling me this. I have to be honest, this changes things significantly. We had already begun preparing the space. How much have you invested in preparation? I asked. About $12,000 in early modifications Derek requested as part of the deal. $12,000. Spent on the strength of my name, without my knowledge. I asked Sandra to send me copies of everything Derek had submitted. She did within an hour. When I opened the documents, I found my forged signature on 3 separate pages, my social security number listed on the financial disclosure, and a fabricated bank letter claiming I had $120,000 in liquid assets earmarked for the project. That letter was on plain paper, with a fake bank header. It wouldn't have survived 5 minutes of professional review, but Sandra was a small landlord, not a forensic examiner. She had trusted the presentation because my family had sold it with conviction. I forwarded everything to my attorney. Then I sat in my car in the hotel parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, because I had just discovered that my brother hadn't just asked for money. He had stolen my identity and used it to secure a commercial lease, forge financial documents, and defraud a property owner. And my parents had known. They had to have known because the $95,000 figure at Christmas Eve dinner matched the lease application exactly. The announcement wasn't a request, it was a cover story. They were trying to retroactively legitimize a fraud that was already in motion. I drove to my apartment, packed a bag, and called the one person in my family I still trusted. My cousin Rachel, who had been at the dinner and had texted me afterward with just 2 words. "I'm sorry." We met at a diner that evening. Rachel told me what happened after I left Christmas Eve. My mother had cried for 10 minutes, then composed herself, and told everyone I was going through a difficult time emotionally and that the family would handle it privately. My father had poured himself a scotch and told people not to worry, because Brooke always comes around. Derek had laughed it off and said I was being dramatic, but would sign by New Year's. Rachel also told me something that made my stomach drop. "Your mom called Derek's landlord the day after Christmas," she said. "She told her you had a breakdown and were temporarily unable to manage your finances, but that the family was working on getting things back on track." My mother had called Sandra Cho and told her I was mentally unfit, to cover for the fraud, to keep the lease alive. I set my coffee down very slowly, because if I hadn't I might have thrown it. The next morning, I sent an email to Sandra Cho. Nolan's mother had done something similar in the original story, but I went further. I wrote a formal statement to Sandra, copied my attorney, and included the fraudulent documents alongside my actual financial records, proving I had never authorized anything. I stated clearly that any representations made by Derek Callahan or Denise and Robert Callahan concerning my involvement were false and unauthorized, and that I was prepared to cooperate with any legal review of the lease application. Sandra replied that afternoon. She said she had immediately frozen the lease, was consulting her own attorney, and had informed Derek that the deal was suspended pending investigation. Derek called me 41 times that day. I answered none of them. My mother sent a text that read, "You are destroying your brother's life. I hope you can live with that." My father sent one that read, "If this goes legal, you'll lose this family permanently." I saved both messages. By New Year's Eve, the situation had detonated in every direction my parents had tried to control. Sandra Cho's attorney sent a formal demand letter to Derek for the $12,000 in modification costs, plus damages for fraudulent misrepresentation. My attorney sent a cease and desist to my parents, and Derek regarding unauthorized use of my identity, my financial information, and my name in any business or contractual dealings. The credit inquiry from 18 months ago, the one I had tried to ignore, my attorney traced it to a credit application submitted from a device registered to Derek's home IP address. My attorney recommended I file a police report for identity theft. I did. That was the moment the story stopped being about a family argument over money and started being about crimes. My mother showed up at my apartment on January 2nd. No makeup, no jewelry, just a winter coat and eyes that hadn't slept in a week. She didn't knock aggressively. She knocked like someone who wasn't sure the door would open. I stepped into the hallway. I did not let her inside. "Brooke, please," she said. "This has gone too far. It went too far when you forged my name on a lease. That was Derek's idea. Your father and I just wanted to help him get started. By stealing my identity?" She flinched. "We didn't think of it that way." "That's exactly the problem, Mom. You never think of it as what it is when it's happening to me." She started crying. Not the performative tears I'd seen at Christmas Eve. Real ones, the kind that come when you realize consequences don't negotiate. "He's your brother," she whispered. "And I'm your daughter," I said. "When did that stop counting?" She didn't have an answer. She stood there for a long time, then said, "What do you want from us?" "I want you to tell the truth. To Sandra. To the family. To everyone you lied to using my name." "We can't do that. It would ruin Derek." "Derek ruined Derek. You just helped him do it quietly." She left without another word. 2 days later, Derek's restaurant deal officially collapsed. Sandra Cho terminated the lease and filed a civil claim for damages. Derek's attorney, paid for by my parents, tried to frame it as a miscommunication. Sandra's attorney submitted the forged documents. Once the forgery was on paper in a legal proceeding, there was no spinning it. My parents received a visit from a detective following up on my identity theft report. My mother called me hysterical afterward. "They came to the house, Brooke. The neighbors saw." "Are you happy now?" I wasn't happy, but I wasn't sorry either. Over the next 2 weeks, the fallout unfolded like dominoes on a marble floor. Relatives who had watched me get ambushed at Christmas Eve started calling me privately. Not all of them were kind. Some said I was tearing the family apart, but several admitted they had always seen the pattern and never said anything. My uncle Frank told me he'd loaned Derek $10,000 3 years ago that was never repaid, and that my mother had told him I would cover it eventually. I had never been told about that loan. My Aunt Grace said my parents had once asked her to pressure me into giving Derek my old car when I upgraded, because Brooke doesn't need 2 cars, and Derek is struggling. She said she refused, and my mother didn't speak to her for 4 months. Rachel showed me screenshots from the family group chat. My mother had posted a message saying I was being manipulated by an attorney, and that the family needed to rally around Derek during this difficult time. Derek posted a photo of himself looking sad at a restaurant with the caption, "When your own sister doesn't believe in your dream." I stared at that photo for a long time. He was eating a $45 steak. The restaurant dream, apparently, did not require personal sacrifice from the dreamer. My attorney advised me to send a single, factual communication to the extended family. I drafted it carefully. No emotion, no accusations, just documentation. I stated that my name and financial identity had been used without authorization in a commercial lease, that forged documents had been submitted to a landlord, that I had filed an identity theft report, and that my parents and brother had been made aware of these issues, but continued to make false statements to relatives. I attached the forged lease, the fake bank letter, the cease and desist, and a screenshot of my mother's text saying that was Derek's idea, which confirmed knowledge. The response was seismic. Within 48 hours, my parents went from family patriarchs to people no one wanted to defend publicly. My grandfather, my father's own dad, called him and said, "Robert, I taught you better than this. You used that girl like a bank machine, and now you're surprised she called the manager." That line got repeated to me by 4 different cousins. It became the unofficial family verdict. Derek's wife, who had been suspiciously quiet through all of this, moved back in with her parents and posted a vague Instagram story about choosing truth over comfort. Apparently, she had discovered that Derek had also forged her signature on a separate personal loan application 6 months before the restaurant scheme. She hadn't known until my documentation prompted her to check. My parents were facing Sandra Cho's lawsuit, my identity theft case, a potential fraud investigation, and the slow-motion collapse of every relationship they had built on the assumption that I would always quietly absorb the cost. My father finally called me in the 3rd week of January. Not to threaten, not to demand. His voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "Brooke, I know we handled this wrong." Handled. Even now, the word choice was managerial, not moral. "Your mother and I want to talk to the family. Set the record straight. Then do it. We need you there." "No," I said. "You need to do it whether I'm there or not. That's what accountability looks like." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry." It was the first time he had ever said those words to me without a condition attached. I let them sit there. I didn't accept them. I didn't reject them. I just let them exist. They held a family video call the following Sunday. 26 people. I joined, but kept my camera off. My father admitted that Derek's restaurant had been funded through unauthorized use of my identity. My mother admitted that she had made statements to Sandra Cho and to relatives that were not truthful. Derek sat in the corner of the frame and said nothing until his wife, joining from her parents' house on a separate screen, asked him to speak for himself. He looked into the camera and said, "I thought Brooke would say yes eventually. I thought if we just got things started, she'd come around. That's how it's always worked." That sentence was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said in 33 years. And it was also the most damning. Because he was right. That is how it had always worked. I had always come around. I had always absorbed the cost. I had always translated their exploitation into my own failure to set boundaries. Until I didn't. After the call, relatives reached out. Some apologized. Some explained. Some minimized. I didn't argue with any of them because I had learned something important. You can't force people to see a pattern they have benefited from ignoring. But I also stopped participating in the family economy of silence. I stopped pretending each incident was isolated. I stopped editing my memory to protect their reputation. My parents ended up settling with Sandra Cho for the full $12,000 plus legal fees. They refinanced their house to cover the costs and the other debts that surfaced once people started comparing notes. My father stepped down from his position as a church elder after the pastor suggested it would be appropriate given the circumstances. My mother lost her spot on the Lake Forest Women's Foundation board after a member saw the documentation circulating among family. Derek moved to Milwaukee. He got a job managing a restaurant he didn't own. His wife filed for separation. And me. I got promoted in February, moved to a new apartment in Lincoln Park with tall windows and a kitchen big enough to actually cook in. I hosted my first dinner party in March. 8 people, all chosen. None obligated. Nobody at that table had ever asked me to fund their ambition. Nobody had ever treated my success as communal property. Nobody had ever slid a forged document across the table and expected me to smile. When someone asked me what I was grateful for, I said, chairs where no one's keeping score. A few people laughed. One friend squeezed my hand because she knew the full story and understood what that sentence really meant. And I don't talk to my parents much. We exchange brief texts on birthdays. It's civil, which is more than I expected, and less than they want. My brother hasn't contacted me since the video call. I don't know if that's pride or shame or both. I don't need to know. People ask me if I forgive them. I tell them forgiveness isn't the right question. The right question is whether I'm still willing to set myself on fire to keep someone else's dream warm. The answer is no. That answer saved my life. If you're watching this and something in your chest tightened because you recognize this pattern, because you are the one your family calls responsible every time they need something funded, fixed, or quietly absorbed, I want you to hear this. You are not a resource. Your stability is not their safety net. And the moment you stop carrying what they've piled on your back, they will call you selfish, ungrateful, cold, dramatic. They will call you everything except what you actually are. Free. So tell me, what would you do? If your family announced a $95,000 commitment in your name at Christmas dinner, would you sign? Would you walk? Or would you do what I did and let the truth speak louder than their story ever could? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward knowing you're not wrong.